QSO Today, Episode 301, Rick Dubbs, WW9JD. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers and accessories for the radio amateur, reminding you to check out their new IC705 all-band portable transceiver. More on this later, and by QRP Labs, makers of the popular QCX kit transceiver and a whole host of parts and kits for the ham radio builder. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. The QSO Today Ham Radio Expo now has an official date of August 8th and 9th, 2020, this summer. We are building this international ham radio convention on a virtual platform never used before in the amateur radio community. It will provide the best user experience to bring together ham radio exhibitors, vendors, and almost 40 speakers and 5 subject tracks with you, the attendees. It will be the closest thing to a full-blown ham radio convention as the real thing, but in an online and virtual environment available from anywhere in the world. As a groundbreaking first in the ham radio community, I need your help to move this project forward. If you've not already done so, click on the banner in this week's show notes page or click on the Expo button at the top of the QSO Today website. It's up on the far right. When you push on the button QSO Today Expo Delegate Survey, you'll be taken to a survey form. Please complete this survey and I will give you a free registration to the QSO Today Virtual Ham Radio Expo in August at a $20 value. Your registration helps me to prove to potential exhibitors that this endeavor is worthwhile. Thanks for supporting this project. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth4Z1UG, your host. One of the best ways to find QSO Today guests is to call out prospects from published articles in the ham radio magazines. For me, this includes QST, QEX, CQ Magazine, Electric Radio, Sprat, and a few online newsletters. My guest this week caught my attention because of his redesign of a Heathkit CW keyer using an Arduino and a Nextron display. The display caught my fancy. Rick Dubbs, WW9JD, was the author of the QST article and spent 4 years at sea on submarines, a career teaching kids, and is now retired and working on ham radio projects. We cross into other areas, including drone flying. I hope that you'll enjoy this hour with WW9JD. WW9JD, this is Eric 4Z1UG. Are you there, Rick?
I'm here, Eric. Shalom.
Shalom, Rick. Thanks so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, when I was fairly young, certainly elementary school, though I don't remember the year, my dad had an interest in ham radio and had reel-to-reel audio tapes teaching Morse code. And so he sat my brother, who was younger than I, and I down to try to teach us Morse code. Didn't take. But I still saw some interest there. Throughout high school, I was messing around with electricity and electronics and trying to learn Morse code because you didn't get a ham radio license back then without Morse code. And I still couldn't get through it. Finally, after high school, I went into the U.S. Navy, into the nuclear propulsion program. And I was in, of all places, Idaho Falls, Idaho, going to prototype training. The Navy had, I don't know if it has or not, had some reactor prototypes out in the desert of Idaho. And I was doing some learning on the reactor prototype out there. And, I had a feeling of, malaise or something, because I just didn't have anything besides that coursework to do. And I usually had some projects going or something like that. And so I decided to take another run at ham radio. At that point in time, ARL had come out with Tune in the World with ham radio that had the audio tape to teach Morse code and the book to teach you everything you needed for your novice license. And I sat down and got through it and found a ham radio operator at the reactor prototype who gave me the novice test, and I was licensed WD9 EPI. And that would have been in, I think, 77.
So that was technician class license?
No, that was novice.
Really? With a D? WD9. Okay. And so what happened after that?
I still I still had some prototype training left to do, so I was still there in Idaho Falls. Now I was anticipating my license. You had to wait till you got the paper copy of the license to get on the air back then. I was waiting on that. I had no radio gear, but the way prototype training was rotating shift work. And so every few weeks I had like 4 days off. My buddy, who I was sharing a house with, and I both rode motorcycles. And I decided that we should go down to Los Angeles to, name escapes me right now, but a ham radio dealer down there.
It would be Henry Radio in Los Angeles then.
Good chance, really good chance, Henry Radio. I would go down and see what I could get. And I came back with already built Heathkit DX60B and HR10B and the VFO HG10 and strapped that on the back of my motorcycle. We came back up and I put a station together with a wire antenna.
Do you remember your first contact?
Not specifically, but of course it was Morse code. The DX60B only did Morse code in AM. Nervous as heck, but got through it. And I don't operate a lot, but hands down, my most enjoyable contacts have been with Morse code.
So you'd say that that's your favorite operating mode?
Would have to say that, yes. When I operate, it's probably Morse code, and I'm not real good at that either.
I read someplace that you're a builder, that you like building kits. Are you a kit builder?
Yeah, I've done a number of kits. Kudos to you for doing a K2. I certainly would like to do that, but haven't yet. I have my main radio for quite a while was a 10-Tech kit, and I had that when I was living in a mobile home, which made for a great ground plane. That radio is only like 3 watts out, and I talked to Austria on it, got that contact confirmed, and so I've got the 1,000 miles per watt certificate. And that was just made with a hamstick style mobile antenna on the mobile home. So I say great ground plane.
How long did you stay in the Navy?
6 years in the Navy. I was 4 years in a fast attack submarine. I worked back in the engineering spaces with the steam plant. When I got out of the Navy, my primary reason for going in the Navy was getting the GI Bill so I could go to college and get my college education, and that ended up being a teaching certificate. I had planned to go to college. I decided that I was going to teach high school photography and journalism because from my time in the Navy and doing training and that sort of thing, and my time in Boy Scouts, while I was in junior high and high school as a Boy Scout, I earned Eagle. I could tell that I was, in fact, a teacher. I'm not certain you can actually teach those skills, but it was pretty evident that I could communicate, get ideas across to people. So I was a teacher, and I just needed to get the college education to be able to go do that. I decided to teach high school photography because, once again, my experience in the Navy, I had trouble if my students were being apathetic. And I figured if I taught an elective class that I wouldn't have apathetic students. But at Ball State, which is historically a teacher's college in Muncie, Indiana, I did a survey of schools. I was in a number of schools doing observations and things. I learned that a lot of kids in high school elective classes don't want to be there and are seriously apathetic because the guidance department just scheduled them there. However, middle school kids, they have a lot of energy. They were lots of things, but rarely apathetic. And I could handle their energy. And so I ended up getting my teaching degree in middle school math and science education. I spent the bulk of my 29 years teaching in middle school science, and most of that middle school physical science. And I taught some math.
I'm curious, as a professional educator, did you find that the Boy Scouts had really figured out how to educate boys with their program? Because it seems to me that there was something kind of magical about the Boy Scouts in terms of the way that it all came off.
I agree. I think the program is just outstanding. I really wish that there wasn't so much emphasis, at least in the United States, on sports and sports practice and games takes up so much of a kid's time that there's almost no time for scouts, which I think is a far more valuable program. I agree, there's a magic there. It's not a monolith. It's not a curriculum that's sent down from the national organization or anything. It's a bunch of guys who love the outdoors and love helping boys and get a lot of some really good information and leadership skills across.
Plus, there's a lot of skill building. It kind of is almost a natural in terms of kind of going hand in hand with amateur radio.
Oh, no argument. The Boy Scouts motto is be prepared. And to a great degree, that's the ham radio operator's motto, too. I mean, how many guys have go kits? How many guys are, if they don't have go kits, could put a go kit together in within an hour or so and go out and at least help with an emergency situation, and if not be the ham radio first responders, be able to act as support crew or come in a day or whatever after the fact of the first responders getting there, and be able to do a good job helping out.
It seems to me that a lot of the schools, the middle schools and the high schools, no longer have like the industrial arts programs or elective classes where kids actually were learning skills. When you retired, was that the case? Did you see that kind of evolving away?
Well, now that could be a whole nother discussion. Yeah, it's really, in my mind, sad that at least the U.S. has put so much of an emphasis on standardized testing, and you can't test stuff like that. So because you can't test it, we can't teach it. And it's wrong. Manual training, as it was originally called, I believe started in Scandinavia. It wasn't industrial arts. It wasn't a career kind of an idea. It's the fact that people learn through different avenues, and tactile learning is a valid way to learn. It doesn't really matter if the skills that you're learning are then applicable. How many kids have said, when am I ever going to use this, Mr. Tubbs? I said, well, there's no way for me to know, because you never know what you're going to be doing in the future. Your job probably hasn't been invented yet. And so I'm just trying to give you skills that you'll be able to apply. And primarily, I'm trying to give you the skills to learn the skills you're going to need to have to apply to your job or your avocation somewhere down the road. And the fact that we've gotten rid of that physical track of learning through industrial arts, through home ec, because it can't be tested, that is really a crime almost.
What's interesting is that the television show MacGyver seemed to be so popular on the one hand, right? But what did we love about MacGyver was he could come up with a solution to a problem with whatever was handy.
Yep.
And those were the skills that I remember that we learned in these classes that we're no longer learning now, or we're no longer teaching now. It's interesting that on the one hand, society admires those skills, but they're no longer teaching those skills.
Or giving them an opportunity to learn those skills.
Right.
Yeah.
You came to my attention because you wrote an article in the April 2020 QST magazine where you updated a Heathkit Keyer kit with an Arduino microcontroller and a Nextron display. First of all, how did that project turn out? From the pictures, it was absolutely beautiful, but how did that project turn out for you?
Oh, yeah. I think it's great. Since the article's come out, I've been in communication with another couple of hams. I really hope that the Keyer software, the sketch for the Arduino, gets embellished by other folks in the future. This is the first time I've ever put any software on GitHub, and so the software is there, but I'm not up to speed with being able to do a pull request or whatever, and really manage changes to it. So there's been nothing changed since I put the original on. But there have already been modifications made to the sketch. There have already been modifications made to the user interface on the display. Not huge ones there, but still a couple of little things. And I think that this could be a real good platform for people doing keyers in the future. I can't imagine what you'd want to do that it couldn't do. So I'm hoping that people take it by the reins and go for it.
And now this message from ICOM America. Get outside and be active with ICOM's new IC705 HF to UHF portable transceiver and its optional multifunction backpack. This is ICOM's perfect solution for SOTA and parks on the air. The ICOM IC705 is your perfect QRP companion with its base station features and functionality at the tips of your fingers in a portable package covering HF 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters. This compact rig weighs in at 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds. This beautiful new rig has RF direct sampling for most of the HF band and IF sampling for frequencies above 25 megahertz, and includes a large 4.3-inch color touchscreen with a live band scope and waterfall display. The ICOM IC705 will be the replacement and amazing 21st century baseband rig for microwave DXers, rovers, and contesters, and the operating choice for those under the new S-HAIL geosynchronous satellite footprint. Unbelievable. The radio is 5 watts with its internal battery and 10 watts with an external 13.8-volt power supply. This full-featured radio operates on single sideband CW, AM, FM, as well as full D-Star functions. Included in this package is a micro USB connector, Bluetooth to support linking to your smartphone or Bluetooth headset, built-in Wi-Fi, integrated GPS with antenna and GPS logger, micro SD card slot, and the HM243 speaker microphone, which is standard equipment. The perfect accessory for the IC705 is the optional backpack, the LC192, with a special compartment for your IC705 with plenty of room for antennas, cables, and other gear to get you on the air from the mountaintop or the local park. There is a link to this amazing new rig on the QSO Today podcast website for this episode, and when you order your new ICOM IC705 from your favorite ham radio dealer, be sure to tell them that you heard about it here on QSO Today. My thanks to ICOM America for their continued support of the QSO Today podcast. And now back to our QSO Today. Now, before I push the record button, you had said that you're now retired from teaching.
Yep.
You've actually been retired for quite a while, but you don't look to be that old. So I'm wondering, when you made the transition from being a teacher to retirement, did you acquire some new skills, or did you think that you needed to acquire some new skills in order to make that next transition in your life?
I recall that, excuse me, just after I retired, that I did have some extra time in my day. I started doing some more studying. There's a company called The Great Courses that produces quite a number of video courses, and I started going through some of those. And I still intend to get back to it, but quite honestly, the projects I have picked up since I've retired have so filled my day. I wonder how I had time to teach to begin with.
That's why what was interesting about the article in QST was it looked like you'd done a number of Arduino microcontroller projects. You were very comfortable with the Nextron display. Now, frankly, I'd never heard of a Nextron display, but it caused me to think that I need to add a Nextron display to one of my upcoming projects. How did you get involved with Arduino projects? Was this the first project that you'd done, or had you done other Arduino projects before?
I've done some little things here and there. As you recall, I was headed towards teaching photography. I started photography in high school. My mom and dad were friends with a couple that the guy was a photographer for the Indianapolis Star. Ultimately went through chief photographer and graphics editor for the Indianapolis Star. And while I was in high school, the Indianapolis Star had a publication called the Teen Star, and I did some photography for that. I was doing yearbook and newspaper photography in high school. When I was in the Navy, I managed to get leave during the month of May, which is a particularly big deal in Indianapolis. We have this little race, the Indy 500.
A little race.
Largest single-day sporting event in the world, not happening this year. I think they may have moved it, but in any event, I came back and shot for that for a couple of months. And at one point in time, he told me, and this would have been in the late 70s, that he had been at a conference and had seen demonstrated a digital camera, and that photography was absolutely going in that direction. And it would be in my best interest if I learned everything about computers that I could. Well, at that point in time, small computers, I mean, they were difficult to find. They were not common. We had a Tektronix computer aboard my submarine that I played some sort of a Star Trek game on, but that's not what its purpose was. But it was programmed for that. And so when I got into college, besides the teaching track, I was also taking programming. I took a basic class and got more than 100% in that because of some extra credit I did. At one point in time, had a computer science major, then a minor, and then I said, I'm not going to be doing mainframe programming as a teacher, so I got out of that altogether. But still, I enjoyed programming. After getting out of college, I taught myself Pascal programming, Turbo Pascal programming, Delphi. I started a little business doing a textbook rental program for the student records software that we were using in our district. Indiana is, I think, unique in the U.S. that it rents textbooks to its public school students. Most other states provide that, or the kids have to buy them, but Indiana rents textbooks. And the student record software we were using didn't have a rental module. So I wrote one. So I've been doing programming for a while. Wanted to do some small projects, led me in the direction of Arduino. And so I've done a couple of little things, nothing much. The biggest project I had done before the Kier was my Volvo 240 wagon turn signal died, and a new turn signal switch on some websites listed for $750. Of course, they were marked down. You wouldn't buy them for that, but they were actually asking $125 for a turn signal switch, and I said no. And so I put together an Arduino sketch that would just make use of a regular toggle switch, and I improved some things. I had an automatic shutoff feature and that sort of thing. But then I realized that, hey, if they're asking $750 for a turn signal right now, what's going to break on that Volvo in the future that they're going to want $10,000 for that I'm not going to be able to fix? So that car went away, and that turn signal was never actually implemented. But that would have been the biggest thing before the Kier. And I'd been wanting to update that Micromatic Kier with a touch display for quite a while, but I didn't want to dive into the mechanics of having to program the touch display. All those boxes and everything, and the kind of functionality I wanted to see, I thought would just be more trouble than what it was worth. But somehow or another, probably through an Amazon search, I ran into this Nextion display. That's the way I pronounce it, at least. And it's an LCD display with a touch screen, not capacitive, but a physical touch screen. And the display connects to Arduino or Raspberry Pi or whatever with just two serial communications lines. And then there are two power supply lines, 5 volts and a ground. So you only have the 4 wires coming from this display. The display itself is then programmed with its own integrated development editor, or IDE. And so you, just like I was doing in Delphi, putting together screens with buttons, and when you push the button, then you put some programming behind the button and that sort of thing. You do the same thing with the Nextion, and hook it up to, in my case, the Arduino. And then you have to tell the Arduino about all the controls you put on the Nextion. The Nextion will send a code to the Arduino saying, okay, this has been pushed, and now the Arduino has to handle that push if it's something the Arduino is supposed to handle. The display will handle some stuff, But for example, the display that I used was enhanced, and it has a built-in real-time clock. Setting that real-time clock happens all within, excuse me, the Nextion. The Arduino doesn't touch that at all. It doesn't make use of it either, for that matter, but it doesn't touch it at all. But then increasing keyer speed or decreasing keyer speed and all that sort of thing has to communicate with the Arduino to be able to get it to happen. I'm only using a handful of pins, so I was hoping to be able to put this on a Nano to make the smallest package size I could. The problem being that all of those controls take up a lot of memory. And so I say a handful of pins, but I'm needing to use a Mega 2560 for its memory size to be able to get the job done. And there's a version of the 2560 that is called the 2560 Pro Embedded. That's a tiny little thing. It's only a couple, about 2 by 3 centimeters, and it easily fits on the circuit board that just goes directly behind the Nextion, and it's all the same outline footprint, along with the hardware that you need for interconnection, a few stereo jacks, and a piezo speaker, and it's a pretty small package.
What's the biggest challenge that you had with this project? I mean, it seems like it all just kind of fell into place, but maybe that didn't happen.
Well, there have been a number of challenges. There's still a current challenge. But the Nextion itself, there's not a lot of information on it. The company that makes it seems kind of opposed to giving you the information. They say they have a user forum, but nobody can get access to it. And so it's just folks that have published some information out there about how to get stuff done. They do have some help. The company does have some help out there, but it's not the kind of detailed help you would expect to find. And so there's a tremendous amount of trial and error with this. But one of the reasons why I wrote the article was not really to talk about the Arduino sketch. The article I submitted to QST was about twice as long as what they published. It had much more information about the sketch in it. But they picked up on the important part. It's the Nextion display. There are so many software-defined radio projects coming out that require these large cabinets for the switches and the dials and the indicators and stuff like that. And that can all be handled just on that little tiny Nextion. So you wouldn't need the larger cases that guys have to use to accommodate being able to interact with the radio gear that they've built, if the radio gear is all controlled by an Arduino.
What I thought was great about the article was the detail that you actually went in with a Nextron display, and actually how to program it and make a display that actually looks like buttons. So my hat's off to you for creating that much shared knowledge about a device that I think I could see it on a BitX, or I can see it on a whole bunch of projects. I even had thought that what I wanted was a DTMF pad in my car, because there are still things I do when I drive where I actually want to control something with DTMF. Well, you know what? This little display actually could be a nice lighted DTMF display for the car. So you inspired a new project or two in me with the article that you wrote. What do you think is the biggest takeaway from this project that you did?
I'm still going to have to say the capability of the Nextion, I barely scratched the surface. The device itself can support, I might be off by a little bit, but I think it can support like 255 screens or pages, as they call it, and each page can contain up to 255 controls. So I am using really a handful of pages, and a couple of my pages are packed with controls, but there is just so much there. My one ongoing concern with this is I'm still not completely satisfied with the setting of speed as far as words per minute go. I don't know that my algorithm is exactly right on there, and it doesn't scale the way I would like it to. So I'm going to need to do some work there. And I was thinking the other day that I wonder if it would be possible to actually have, because there's plenty of memory on the Mega 256 for more Arduino sketch. if there's some space in there to put code that could actually time the CW and and have some sort of a watchdog program setting the key or speed rather than just you putting a number into an algorithm. It would be nothing to be able to put together another page or two with controls on it that might give you an actual readout of what your speed is. Right now, the keyer doesn't understand Morse code. The Heathkit keyer did, because it used the Morse code input to store in characters and commands in memory. But this keyer doesn't understand Morse code. The memory is input with the QWERTY keyboard that's a part of the keyer, or you can just take the micro SD card out and stick it in your computer and load up files with text. But I'm thinking that there should be a way that the keyer itself could monitor its speed and be able to set that more accurately. Then on the other hand, do you really need accurate speed setting? As long as you and the other guy can communicate, then it's all good.
Hey, this is Eric for just another short break. One of my favorite ham radio podcasts is the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, hosted by George, KJ6VU, my guest in episode 232, and Jeremy, KF7IJZ. George and Jeremy take a bi-weekly deep dive into their favorite Ham Radio Workbench projects and the technologies that fascinate them. If you want to be a ham radio builder or just be inspired, click on the link in this week's show notes page.
I think I just read an article in QEX about a keyer that is an intelligent keyer. So if your speed isn't consistent as you're using the paddles, that if you set the speed for, say, 20 words a minute, that it just maintains a nice, beautiful 20 words a minute regardless of what you're doing. So maybe there's an opportunity to cross-pollinate between magazine articles and people working on Arduino-based keyers. But certainly, I think in the amateur radio community is large enough now with enough people working Arduino that you probably could have contributions to your GitHub once people know more about it.
I'm hoping, yeah. I'm really hoping, because I used what keyers were out there as at least as source material for looking. I'm not. There are a couple of sections of code that I use that I credit in my sketch, but the way that guys were doing a number of things wasn't really compatible with the way that I was looking to do it, and I was hoping that I could just take somebody's public domain open source keyer and drop that code right in there and be off to the races, and that just didn't work.
Do you think there's some innovation in your approach to solving the problem that might be of interest to other people who are now coding keyers?
I can only hope. I certainly don't know. If I'll probably find that out in the future. If somebody has taken a look at my code and said, that's a better way to solve that problem, then I'll find out that I did some innovation that was useful to somebody. But otherwise, that's going to be hard for me to know.
What was the Bulldogs Amateur Radio Club?
I had tried to get amateur radio going not that long after I started teaching at Monrovia Middle School. I was teaching in the Monroe grade school system in Monrovia, Indiana, which is a town just west of Indianapolis. And I taught all 29 years in that district. I tried to get a ham radio club going there, and was never really, really successful. We never really built up a group of kids that stuck with it from year to year. A number of reasons why, one of which being transportation. The school is rural relatively, and so there was no opportunity during the day, although that was tried for a while. There was really no opportunity during the day for clubs. And after school transportation was limited. Mostly the only kids staying after school were those that were doing sports. So it is a club that I had a club call sign for, which was K9 MHS. So the Bulldog K9, and Monrovia High School was the club vanity call. never really successful in my mind. I tried. I taught code. I taught Morse code classes and novice classes while I was at Ball State. I've taught a lot of people basic code, and a lot of people I've had a hand in a lot of people getting their novice or technician licenses, but just never really very much there. Last couple of years, I was at school. It wasn't really the Bulldogs Amateur Radio Club, but a fifth grade elementary teacher wanted to get a tech club started, and we did some work down there with a a robot platform, and that was pretty much my extra technology experience there at school.
Do you think that kids should be our target for advancing the hobby through the general population? Do you think that, I mean, we were kids when we first had the interest, but unfortunately I don't see very many kids these days that actually have a technology interest, like what's underneath the lid of their smartphone, for example.
Well, it's certainly different now, and I don't know, I'm not psychologist or sociologist enough to know. When we were kids, there was no talking around the world by going into your bedroom, other than ham radio. Now, what's the big deal? Their smartphone has all that on it already. So what they don't realize, of course, is if we were to have a physical rather than a biological emergency worldwide, their smartphones would be useless. And it'd be the ham radio operators that would then be able to communicate around the world, because the cell phone networks go down first. They're not designed for emergency loads. They're barely designed for normal loads. I don't know that kids are the best target. A lot of things in ham radio require you to be able to be self-motivating physically, be able to get in your car and go, to be able to be places that maybe your parents just don't have the time to do, that sort of thing. But the exposure to it, I think, is valuable. When I was a kid in high school, there was a high school ham radio club that I came by a few times, and it also wasn't overly successful and everything. But there are some dynamic teachers out there, of which I just wasn't one, that get good organizations going and get a good group of kids. And at the bottom, I do believe that any young person that has earned a ham radio license and puts it into use will see a positive influence in their career. So I think that the potential is really important, but the realization may not be that big a deal. It may wait until kids become adults, that they have the time and they're independent enough and they have money enough. I know a 2-meter handheld can be had for under $50 these days, but to do much with a 2-meter handheld, you have to have a car to be able to go out to public service events or do weather spotting or something like that.
I think it was maybe the same issue of QSC magazine that had the article about comparing all the handhelds. I think that was the one where they're showing the spectral analysis of all of the various brands, and of course the ones under $50 appear to transmit in more than a few places at the same time. That was interesting. You know, you had mentioned earlier that you'd spent 4 years at sea in submarines, not only in submarines, but kind of in the engine room, as it were, in the engineering section. What comes to mind is Star Trek, because you're kind of in the medium. We're currently, just to put this in context for someone that might be listening in another 100 years, we're currently enjoying the COVID-19 pandemic, where we've all been locked down for the last 5 weeks or so, some of us more, some of us less. But, you know, we're learning how to work in a confined space. We're learning how to social distance. We're learning how to live with whoever it is we're living with, our wives, our families, in very close quarters without actually having any contact with anyone else. Are there any skills that you learned spending 4 years on a submarine that you're applying right now in this crisis?
Well, one thing I learned and the preferred preposition is in a submarine. On a submarine, it gets awfully wet. One thing I learned is that I can live and work with just about anybody. You just have to be accommodating to the needs and the peculiarities of those around you. I mean, in the boat, there were ballpark 120 guys. And we were all probably better educated than a random selection of 120 others from the Navy, which are probably better educated than a random selection of 120 others from just the general walk of life. But you had to get along because there was no storming out of the room and taking a walk around the block because the place just wasn't that big. So yeah, I get along. I do my best to get along and accommodate the needs of those around me. Of course, I've been married for 35 years, and so I've been accommodating somebody for quite a while. And the other person here in the house is my son, who is a little over 30 years old. So we've been together for a while, but one of the things that I find amusing as to people's reaction to COVID-19 is they're treating everything like it's radioactive. Well, I'm a trained radiation control worker. I've dealt with radioactivity. I've dealt with nuclear reactor primary coolant, and they're worrying about the virus, I think, just a little more than it needs to be. Now, I agree that it's deadly. I agree, too, that it's invisible. At least we had the advantage with radioactivity that a Geiger counter would let you know if it's there or not. But to see some of the people in some of their protective gear, it's looking like this is way more likely to kill them dead in an instant than what it really is.
Are you doing amateur radio at this point? Do you have more projects, or for you, your life is pretty much the same as it was before? The disruption is not large because of you're mostly retired?
Well, that, and I have a part-time job. I work in a woodworking supply store, and it's considered a hardware store. It's considered essential. And so my working hours haven't even changed. My wife works at a gas station, which is essential. Now, she has asthma and allergies, and those kind of flared up. Her asthma doctor then advised her to go into emergency. And right now she's on a couple of weeks of self-isolation, but was not tested for COVID-19. And my personal feeling is that she has many of the symptoms, but not all of the symptoms. And so it's looking a lot to me like the kinds of asthma and allergy things that she's had in the past. So we're both hopeful that she doesn't have COVID-19. But no, really, my schedule hasn't changed all that much, except for the fact that it takes longer to go to the grocery store because of having to look around for stuff that isn't there anymore, and having to try to adapt, improvise, and overcome on what we're going to have for supper tonight.
And now this message from QRP Labs. QRP Labs has shipped thousands of QCX QRP transceivers kits to date. The odds of working another QCX user gets better every day. If you're looking for a satisfying kit experience where you end up with an amazing performing QRP transceiver for under $50, let me say that again, for under $50, then you owe it to yourself to go to QRP Labs. We have many home brewers who listen to the QSO Today podcast. For you, QRP Labs also has parts, filters, enclosures, and other handy devices to make your home brewing experience even better. You can use these parts to either enhance your QRP Labs kits or to beef up your own homebrew designs. Be sure to browse Hand's entire website. Use the link on this week's show notes page or the one in the sponsored section of the QSO Today website to get to QRP Labs to buy your QCX or any of the other fine QRP Labs kits or parts. QRP Labs is my go-to ham radio kit company. It should be yours too. QRP Labs. And now back to our QSO Today. But do you think there's anything positive that's coming out of the way that we're either social distancing or the way that we're relating to each other in this time of duress?
Well, I see that like our last major national emergency was 9/11, and for a while there after that, we were all treating people nicer, a little more courteously. It seems that that as I move around in stores and stuff like that, that most people are trying to maintain the social distance they're supposed to. I think one thing that may be a positive result after this in just general health of the country is I'm expecting that mask wearing is going to become maybe as common here as it is in Japan. Those folks have been wearing masks during cold and flu season when they're sick for quite some time, and it's kind of looked funny to us, but I don't think it's funny anymore, and we're quite likely going to be doing that going forward.
Right. I think there'll be a few things that won't change after some new habits we've learned that will keep. What do you think is the greatest challenge to amateur radio now?
Once again, when we were young, the only way to have a communication around the world, or even much away from your own residence, was ham radio. There was a magic to it. There was a oh gosh, I just talked to somebody in California, being here in Indiana, said, "Oh wow, really?" And that was a point of conversation. But these days, that's not there. Personally, what I like, what keeps me renewing my license every year is I like a challenge. I like to be able to problem solve. And ham radio presents an unlimited number of problems to solve. All you have to do is pick up an interest in something. That's one of the things that I like about computer programming is all you have to do is start in on a project, and you have a nearly unlimited number of problems to solve from the very beginning. You just don't know what they are. They crop their heads up as you go along, and some present themselves later. That's why technology folks are really in a great business, because there really is a lot of job security. Technology just never perfectly works. So folks that can fix technology, folks that can do programming, are always going to be in demand. I found it really amusing that states were in trouble because they hadn't listened to their technology folks and didn't update their software. And for a while, they were needing COBOL programmers because so many of the unemployment code was written in COBOL and nobody knew how to run it anymore.
And did they have any luck finding COBOL programmers? I mean, those guys would be in their 80s now, I would think.
I would think so, too. I haven't heard any more stories lately, and I haven't heard any states that have shut down their unemployment processing. But so I'm guessing that they found what they needed, or people got up to speed pretty quickly.
Now, you mentioned earlier that when you were working with the kids on technology, that you actually joined someone who was doing projects with robotics. Do you think that robotics and drones might have that wow factor that Talking Around the World did for us when we were young?
At least to a degree, to be able to do something and see your impact on something quickly. I think that's always going to be of interest to a kid, particularly upper elementary, middle school kid who's just seen that they can have an impact on the things around them. No longer is mommy and daddy doing everything for them. They can see that they can now perform some action, and the environment shows a change because of their action. That those kinds of things that could be really valuable. Drones, I'm not so sure about. I have a drone. Some of the photography I do is with the drone. But the robotics thing, I think, is probably a little bit better for getting their interest and being able to provide a reward more quickly.
Do you see any amateur radio applications towards your drone? Is there any advantage that amateur radio applied to your drone could give you some functionality that you don't have now?
Well, unfortunately, the drone isn't controlled by the FCC. It's controlled by the FAA. And if you talk to many drone pilots around the world, the national governmental bodies that are controlling the skies seem to pretty much just want to ground all the drones. And so innovation and that sort of thing is is not a big topic of discussion. Technically, I can't fly my drone beyond where I can see it. But since the thing only weighs 249 grams, is not very large, and my eyes aren't all that great,
Right.
I wouldn't be able to fly it very far at all if I stuck with that requirement. Now, the drone has a camera. I can see what the drone sees really well, but the FAA is not real big on allowing what's called first-person video, being able to use the camera as your piloting input for the drone, and they have put out a notice of proposed rulemaking, just like we see from the FCC. We've got an FAA notice of proposed rulemaking that had its comment period closed the 1st of March. That if they implement some of the stuff in their proposal, could pretty much eliminate drones as a hobby in the U.S.
You'd have to be a licensed drone pilot, in order to use the drone, in other words.
No, I am a licensed drone pilot, and they're going to restrict it to such a degree that I don't know that I can even take the pictures of houses that I do for real estate photography right now.
Really? How interesting. I guess I understand perhaps they're worried about drone density in air corridors, approaches to airports and things like that. Are there other issues that they're worried about, privacy issues, in your opinion, what's driving them?
I think it's primarily paranoia. They don't understand, and they've seen a number of movies and TV shows that have shown drones in a negative way. People have used drones illegally, like to provide contraband for prisons. What you have here is something that is easy to control. It's under GPS. It uses GPS to control its position in 3 dimensions. I look at it as a camera on an up to 400-foot tall tripod. I can just set it and take pictures, and it just stays there. If I don't have any input into the controls, it doesn't crash. It just hovers until it doesn't have any battery anymore. And they're concerned, I think, about what people might do. It's all, a paranoia, a worry about what might happen, because drones are limited to 400-foot height, and airplanes are limited to a 500-foot floor. So there isn't any opportunity to come together. Here in the U.S., the FCC allows antenna structures up to 200 feet without lighting devices on them. And so 200 feet and down, apparently the FAA doesn't even have any antenna control. So there's an awful lot of airspace that drones could make use of that the FAA has already ceded to not being space it's going to control, but yet they want to anyway.
Do drones have radio transponders on them, like a VHF or UHF transponder, so that it could be tracked by, or actually I think the transponders on aircraft, an ADS-B, for example, is 1 gigahertz. Does your drone have any kind of transponder that could be tracked by someone else?
Mine is not required to, and even presently under the FAA's NPRM, my drone falls under the weight limit, and I'd probably be able to use mine until they decide to lower the weight limit. But those things are possible. The FAA has kind of ruled them out. As a matter of fact, very early in the NPRM, the FAA says that the ADS-B technology cannot be used on drones. They fear that it will oversaturate the ADS-B frequencies, and yet within the ADS-B guidelines that are published elsewhere for other FAA things, they even say that ADS-B is such a useful service that they could put it on ground equipment so that airplanes could be able to track the equipment on the ground and airports to avoid collisions and that sort of thing. And to me, that would be lots more signals in a smaller area than what drones could possibly produce. So that's it. It's not looking good. It just kind of depends on whether or not this governmental agency, other governmental agencies around the world will understand that if there isn't a strong hobby drone market out there, these companies that are making drones that are used by first responders, by law enforcement, right now they can buy a drone for $30,000 that does an excellent job in finding lost persons or evaluating emergency areas, that sort of thing. But those companies can make those drones and sell them for $30,000 because they're selling a lot of $1,000 drones. Sorry about that. A lot of $1,000 drones to hobbyists that are supporting the company and allowing them to do that. Without those $1,000 drone sales, then police departments, other first responders are going to have to spend the kind of money on their drones that the military has to spend for proprietary, unique hardware. And that's going to be just a huge hit and a huge loss of capability to law enforcement and first responders.
Is there a usership of drone users that are innovators like hams are?
They are to the degree, some, and I'm not a part of the community, the folks that race drones, and literally there are these little tiny drones that are not much bigger than your hand that folks will race. They put on virtual reality goggles, and they race as first-person viewers, FPV. They race them through courses that have large openings. I know the closest thing that I can think of is like a croquet wicket, but much bigger, that they have to race their drones through. And these guys start with a frame, and they use different radios and different cameras, and so they build that up. They may not be going below the component level down to, the individual transistors and stuff, but they are at least home brewing their racing drones to the putting it together on a frame level, and yeah, they are being as innovative as they can be. It's not legal to design your radios and your transmitters. Now, within model airplanes, there is ham radio involved in more traditional model airplanes, where there's some control. You can have better control of an airplane. You can have more channels if you have a ham radio license and you're on ham radio frequencies. That's about all I know of that, but I know that it exists. In the drone community, I don't think that's there.
Are you involved with emergency communications or a radio club in Indianapolis?
I am not. I have been in the past. I have done some Skywarn, some storm spotting in the past, but I haven't been doing that lately. No, I just haven't really gotten involved in a club once again lately. I have been in the past.
What excites you the most about what's happening in ham radio now?
When I'm opening an issue of QST, I'm mostly looking at the construction projects and seeing if there's something there, and there's certainly a lot going on. Seeing if there's something there that might be a direction that I want to take. I have played with FT8 and the digital modes. As far as I was concerned, I am able to make fairly reliable contacts on that. I kind of noticed that in myself that I'll get something up to a level where I'm comfortable doing it or doing it pretty well, and then if there's no more challenge there, I kind of go on. And so I can hook up the computer and I can do FT8 just fine.
Do you have advice that you would give to newer returning hams to the hobby?
Ham radio is at least as diverse as it's always been. If you have an interest in technology, an interest in radio at all, there is likely something there that you can get your hooks into and have a great time. If you just want to, if you just want to help out the folks around you, there's all sorts of opportunities for public service. So there's no reason that you can't piggyback other interests that you have with technology in ham radio.
Rick, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. It's been a blast. I'm really glad that you said yes and agreed to have the meeting today. So with that, I want to wish you 73, and thank you so much for joining me.
Eric, 73 to you, and shalom.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Rick. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in WW9JD in the search box at the top of the page. Be sure to check out the QSO Today Virtual Ham Radio Expo on the show notes page, or go to qsotodayhamexpo.com, that's qsotodayhamexpo.com, one word, for more information, and to buy your early bird ticket. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support for these fine sponsors by clicking on their links in the show notes pages, or by using QSO Today in the coupon box at the checkout. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor, monthly or annually, by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page, or use my Amazon link before shopping at Amazon. Amazon gives me a small commission on your purchases while at the same time protecting your privacy. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as I head towards episode 300. QSO Today is now available on iHeartRadio and a bunch of other online audio services, including the iTunes Store. Look on the right side of the show notes pages for a listing of these services. You can use Amazon Echo and say, "Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn."
Special thanks to Ben Bresky, who now edits the audio for this QSO Today podcast from the audio pieces that I give him.
Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.